We're so grateful that you're with us this evening for a special program with the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County. Tonight, our program is a continuation in our anti-racism training, and especially understanding the history of Northern California Native Americans and the First Nation peoples. And we're so blessed to be able to have Corrina Gould from the Sogorea Té Land Trust, which is a place where you can do reparations by giving a gift or a Shuumi Land Trust gift. It's a group led by Indigenous women to protect the sacred spaces around the Bay Area. And as we consider where it is that we live and the land that we live and work and spend our time, Corrina will be leading us in that, but we know that our county is of mixed origins with many different tribes and sub-tribes around, including both the Bay, Miwok, and Ohlone people having a special relationship with Tayushtak or Pisgah, what we call Mount D, but has a colonial name now that I don't use. So we're appreciative for Corrina being here with us tonight. We've been planning this for some time, and we're so grateful for her to be here. We're going to keep everyone muted during her presentation, and then we're going to be able to have questions and answers after the presentation. So take it away, Corrina. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. So great to see you all tonight. Thank you for spending your evening with me. Horshetuhi ka'atla shanka ka'atra'ak Corrina. And that is Chochenyo, the very first language of the East Bay. Chochenyo language was the language my great-grandfather Jose Guzman spoke. He spoke multiple languages. He was brought into Mission San Jose as a slave, and there was multiple languages that were spoken there. The Lishan tribe is actually made up of the multiple language groups and tribes from the Bay Area. So the 5 tribes that our tribe is made from is the Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Yokut, Ohlone, and Napian. And so we cover a very large base. And so I'm going to start us through a conversation going back a couple of hundred years. And if we know about California, California is a really young state. And so I don't know where you all first originated from. Maybe you've been in California your entire life. Maybe you came here during your young adult life. Maybe you came here over the last couple of generations. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through a presentation. And then I hope it opens up some ideas for dialogue. So, whoops, did that wrong. Share screen. So I am coming to you from the territory of Huichin. It's one of multiple territories in the Bay Area. Huichin is the area that covers multiple cities in the Bay Area. It covers Oakland, Alameda, Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so it's a larger territory. It's much larger than a city and smaller than a county. And so territorial boundaries were places that our ancestors were born to take care of. And I like to start off with this quote by Rowan White. It says, "My body is a cartography of stories, of ancestors asking not to be forgotten. We are not a conquered people." It speaks to me because when I look at my traditional territory, my territory of all of these counties in the Bay Area, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Joaquin, Napa, and Solano, it tells us stories, right? We have stories of our own, growing up here maybe, or having time with our families, or going on hikes. But for us, the cartography of the Bay Area has changed in a lot of different ways. The landscape has changed, just as we all have changed over time. My ancestors lived here for thousands of years before first contact. And when I talk to young people, I say, well, there wasn't any photographers here a long time ago, right? Photography wasn't a thing. So there were a few people that drew my ancestors. And this drawing here is a representation of my ancestors in Regalia. It's not a costume. It's the clothes that they wore during special occasions, very special ceremonies that happen. When I talk to children, I say, imagine if you're going to a wedding or you're going to church on Sunday and you're dressing up really nice. These are the clothes you would wear, right? These are not clothes that you would wear on a daily basis. And this particular picture represents my ancestors getting ready for a very important ceremony. And our belief system is that this regalia has a life of its own. And so when we see people dressing up in Indian, what they say, Indian headdresses or Indian costumes, it's really offensive, because for us, the regalia has a lot of meaning for us. It actually connects us between our spirituality and our creator. And so it's something that is not taken on lightly. Folks that dress in regalia for these ceremonies have special songs that they sing to wake the regalia up. And they have special songs that they sing to put it back to sleep. And unlike a costume that might end up in the Goodwill bin or in a box in your garage, these regalias are taken care of very seriously throughout the lifetime of the dancers. My ancestors lived in villages all along the bay. We were fishermen and hunters, and we worked in reciprocity with the land. And our village sites were often where fresh water met salt water. And so along the bay, we created these villages using the materials around us. Tule was used to create our homes and our boats, baskets that we would carry our babies in, and other things. And today, during this time in the world where we talk about climate crisis, and we're talking about this change in the world, we talk about, as human beings, we want to leave a smaller footprint on the earth. Well, my ancestors lived like that for thousands of years, leaving a small footprint on the earth. Almost everything that was created was biodegradable. It went back into the earth. And so leaving a very small footprint here. Then the missionaries came with Spanish soldiers. Now, the colonization that happened in California was much different than what happened on the East Coast. When the Spanish soldiers came, it was very different. It was not by a take of force so much as it was on the East Coast. It was this way of taking over land because they were afraid that the Russians were going to take the land. But with the Spanish missionaries and the Spanish soldiers came things that had never been on this land before. It brought diseases that our ancestors had never encountered before. And so the immune systems were not ready for those things, and many people perished. People died from being whipped to death, being outright killed and murdered. And there was a high rate of infant mortality then because of the nutritional value of the food that was given to Native Californians in the missions. Native Californians were given food that had less nutritional value than sometimes people were given in the prisons in Auschwitz. And so when we begin to think about that, people in the city, in the place of abundance, my ancestors had these songs about the abundance that was here in the Bay Area. I talked to my nephew as we were coming from Santa Cruz one day. We did an event there, and we were coming here to to a synagogue in Oakland to do another presentation. He says, "Auntie, I know songs from all over the country." And the songs that they sing in the middle of the country where they have really harsh winters were always about, please help us. We're pitiful. We need your help. But the songs in California along the coast are always about thankfulness, about the abundance that was here, about being grateful. California, if you look at it, this is where the missions were, or they actually still stand, most of them, right? There was 21 of them. So I'll give you a little bit of fourth grade history again. In California, fourth grade history, ask, well, how did the Spanish come and get this land? And kids will say they fought for it, and mostly that's what we'll say. But Cabrillo, this man named Cabrillo, was coming down the coast of California, in the 1500s, and he saw the land on the side of his ship as he's coming down the coast. And what we believe at the time when we were setting fires to the land, and that was a natural way of taking care of the land, living in reciprocity of the land for thousands of years, Native Californians actually did burns. And they knew at what time of year to do those burns so we wouldn't get the catastrophe of burns that we have today. It was a way of taking care of the forests. In many diaries of people that came to our lands, they talked about how the forests were so wide open, you could just ride your horse through without having any obstacles in your way. It was because of the land management that the indigenous people, my ancestors, had for this land. Doing those things actually got rid of underbrush. It also brought up new shoots for basket materials. It brought those new shoots in for animals to come eat. It made it easier for us to hunt those animals because it was wide open. And so there was a lot of different ways that that land management happened. But going back to Cabrillo's story, Cabrillo's coming down the coast of California and he sees this land and he calls dibs on it. And some of you may know what dibs is, right? If I have a pink box of donuts and I only have one donut left and you call dibs on it, that means you get that last donut. Well, that's what Cabrillo did. He didn't get off the ship. He didn't come and talk to the people of that land. He just claimed that land for Spain and the crown. And then he got down to San Diego and he was there for 4 days and he died, but not before doing that. So Spain now owns this land without having any relationship to the people and did not come back for about 200 years. Came back 200 years because the Russians were doing fur trade with Northern California natives, and they knew about that. And in order for them to hold the land, they decided to put these missions there. Now, they had used the mission systems against indigenous people in what is now called Mexico and Central America. They knew that they could enslave indigenous people and hold down the land and therefore keep it safe, this land that they called dibs on 200 years before, from the Russians coming to take it over. And the first man to start these missions was this guy who was an evangelical Christian Catholic, Junipero Serra. And Junipero Serra was excited about coming to these lands to missionize the Indians. It was not about saving the Indians that were alive. It was about collecting the souls of the dead. And so he would write in his diary that there was a good harvest in both wheat and souls, which meant that Native people were dying off at a very high rate, but not before being baptized. So Junipero Serra created the first 9 of these missions. 2 of these missions, Mission San Jose in Fremont and Mission Dolores in San Francisco, were where my ancestors were directly enslaved at. Because the missions did a great job at writing down where their new workers came from or slaves came from, we could date back to the first contact when my ancestors were taken into which mission in which year and what their names were changed over to. And so we can directly take our ancestry back to these missions and the beginning of colonization. What most people in the Bay Area don't know is that Ohlone people are actually 8 different nations of people with 8 different languages and 8 different songs, 8 different creation stories. Our songs and our dances are different. So these language areas are areas of large places, maybe like a state, you would say. And within each of these places, these language bases, were multiple tribes. So there was never one overarching tribe. And actually, at the very beginning, when Spanish first got here, they called us all Costanoan. And that was a misnomer. And we were named that in all of the anthropology and archaeology books for many years. It wasn't until about the 50s and 60s when Ohlone people took the name Ohlone and began to use that. And it's mostly the northern part of people, the people that live up in this area that call themselves Ohlone. Sometimes people down in this area don't use that as much. And so that's something that's new that most people don't know. They kind of all throw us all together, like the Spanish did. They said, oh, they kind of all eat the same food, they dress the same, they use the same kind of housing, therefore they are all the same. That we are very different kind of people with different relationships to the lands on which we live. After that land was stolen for the first time, the Spanish period of missions lasted for about 99 years. And in that time, the languages started to disappear as Spanish became the predominant language. Hunting and gathering became more of learning about how to grow foods that were mono crops, and our ancestors lost possession of going to their lands to do the work that they had done for thousands of years in reciprocity. Then Mexico came and they stole the land, and that was after Mexico received its independence from Spain. And they stole the land for a second time. And our ancestors quite literally went from being slaves at these missions to being slaves on ranchos. So the lands of the missions were squished down to very few. And what they say is that the natives were set free, but set free to where? Because there was no land that was not occupied by someone that now owned it. One of these ranchos that was given away, these were land grants that were given to people that had fought in the war. And so one of these land grants, Rancho San Antonio, was the Peralta land grant. And in the Bay Area, we hear Peralta's name all over the place. Schools are named after it. Hospitals, streets are named after Peralta. And Peralta owned this land between around the edge of Oakland and San Leandro, all the way to about Albany. So many of the places that my ancestors had been for thousands of years were here. So if you look where I'm pointing with my pointer, that's Lake Merritt, if you know Oakland. And so this has always been here. These are marshlands, and along these ways were shell mounds that were created, and mounds are their ancestral burial sites. So my ancestors became slaves on these ranchos for the different ranchers in the Peraltas, the Bernals, many places in Contra Costa, because there was no place else to go. In 1848, Mexico and America had a war, and the land was stolen for a third time, and this time by the United States. Instead of slavery, it was now about mass extermination. You see, you learn about my ancestors in 4th grade in school, and then in 5th grade, you learn about the gold rush. And we hear these great things about people coming here looking for gold. The problem is that the United States had made treaties all the way across the lands until they got to California, and they were no longer interested in that, especially since gold was hit in California. So thousands of people came here hoping to get rich on gold, but not everybody could. So California created some laws that many people, even adults today, aren't aware of. Some of the very first laws in California were laws of extermination. California spent $1.4 million killing California Native people, $5 a head and 25 cents an ear. This was money that was backed by the federal government. Not everybody could find gold, but on a weekend with your buddies, you can go into a native village and you could kill off the adults and make money. And then you could round up the children and take them into town and sell them, $300 for a little girl to $180 for a little boy. And so became the dissolution of the tribal families and tribal ways because of this law that was placed, these bounties on our heads. Not only was that law enforced, but there was another law. It was a vagrancy law. The vagrancy law was really about enslavement of Native people in California still. You see, A Native person could not go into a court of law against a white man, but a white man could drag a Native person into the court justice and say that this person was vagrant. And the court justice would give that person to be virtually a slave, indentured to that person, up to 25 years, as long as that person would say that they could feed and clothe them. So California was set up as a state that was supposed to be without slavery, except they did enslave Native people here. Slaves owners that were in the South, hoping to make more money coming to California to find gold, could not bring their Black slaves here as slaves, but they could enslave Black Indigenous people on this land and force them to work on their ranches and to work in the mines. When we survived all of that, the boarding school and Indian foster care was created. And the boarding schools were not boarding schools like we see today, where wealthy families send their children away to get good educations. These boarding schools were created to erase and assimilate the Indianness out of Native students. Sometimes students were sent thousands of miles away from their homelands, forced to not speak their languages and to learn a trade so that they could become good citizens. My auntie and my mother and my uncle were sent to Chemawa boarding school in Oregon. And a few years ago, my auntie tells a story about this foster care. Foster care is not for Indians was not like it is today, when people are trying to find homes, good homes to take care of kids whose families can't take care of them. Kids were taken away specifically and sent to boarding school to learn a trade. And once they were finished, they were farmed out to wealthier families' homes, basically as servants. So my auntie had gone to Chemawa boarding school. She was born in 1938. She went to boarding school, and when she was about 12 years old, she was released and sent to San Leandro to a family's home. She tells us this story in her living room about 2 years ago. She tells me this story in front of her daughters, who are my cousins, who had never heard this story before. She said, oh yeah, she goes, when I left Chemawa, she goes, I was placed in this white family's home in San Leandro. And I cooked for them and I cleaned and I took care of their children. And they were so nice, they wanted to send me to school. And the city of San Leandro said no, that she was too dark to attend their schools. This was not that long ago that this happened. So this is not a history that we're talking about. That's something that we can't conceive of a few hundred years ago. This is something that happened in the lifetime, maybe of some of the people that are in this room today. So this Indian foster care was another way of trying to assimilate our people. My auntie ended up marrying her husband at the age of 14 and having 7 children and working as a waitress at the Acapulco restaurant in Alameda until she retired. She continues to live in Oakland today. She's the matriarch of our family. All of that stuff happened. And then our elders kind of went underground. It was a scary thing to be Native, to know that your children might be taken away, to hear those horrific stories of family members being hunted down. And so it was safer to be hidden away and to pretend to be another ethnicity than it was to be Ohlone in our own territory. It was within my lifetime that we began to see a revolution of people beginning to stand up and to tell our own stories. That we were able to begin to talk about these horrific histories that happened here. This place of abundance, this place where, if you can imagine 200 years ago, there was no concept of hunger or homelessness in the Bay Area. And today we see that tenfold over. This is probably the worst I have ever seen it in the Bay Area, with so many people living without a home. And still there's still abundance here in the Bay Area, but not the abundance that we had thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. when every creek had fresh water to drink out of, when there was salmon and trout coming up, where everyone had enough to eat and a place to live. We have to wonder, as a society, have we really done better? We have to think about that. Well, about 25 years ago, my friend Janella and I started an organization called Indian People Organized for Change, because nobody was talking about Ohlonies and nobody knew that we still existed or that our shell mounds existed. Nobody gets taught about shell mounds in school unless you're in archaeology or anthropology. In 1909, this man named Nels Nelson, who worked with the new archaeology department at UC Berkeley, created this map. He knew that over 100 years ago that there was so much development happening in the Bay Area that these shell mounds were going to be destroyed. And each of these little tiny numbers represents a shell mound. In 1909, he found over 425 of them that ringed the Bay Area. These were places of our ancestors, where we buried our ancestors in shell and soil and rock. And over thousands of years, they became these monuments, hills that were sometimes over 3 stories tall. These were places that our ancestors had ceremony on top of. We lived alongside of our ancestors like everybody else in the world. We didn't have cemeteries that were really far away from us, but these were the places that our ancestors were put in rest for their last sleep. 425 of them that he's found over 100 years ago, and virtually none of them exist today. In Emeryville, the largest of the 425 shell mounds, this one was 3 stories high. It was 350 feet in diameter. It was a large one with, you can imagine a huge mound and then smaller ones coming off like fingers. The shell mound in Emeryville was a place of trade. It was a place of commerce, but it was also a place that had a lot of meaning to us for thousands of years. Today, Bay Street Mall sits on top of it. The city of Emeryville had created this brownfield there. For years, they had factories sitting on top of it. And if you lived in the Bay Area, like I did all my life, if you would go along that corridor some years ago, you would see all these old factories off to the side of the freeway where Emeryville was. And at that, before there was EPA laws, they were dropping arsenic and chemicals into the ground. And for years, that those chemicals would, every time it would rain, it would seep into Temescal Creek and out to our bay and create this big brown blob. Well, around the time of what I call, when the internet was created, right? Around the late 90s, when there was this boom of internet, which allows us to see each other today, right? But there was this wave of gentrification that happened then, because people in the Bay Area started outbidding each other for houses and apartments, and it caused this wave of people to move out of the Bay Area at the time. And the city of Emeryville received some money to clean up this brownfield. And what they decided to do was to create a mall on top of it to bring commerce back into their city. And what they did was they created this little tiny mound that's supposed to represent thousands of years of my ancestors. And they put up some columns that talk about the history, but at some point the history stops. It's the continual erasure of our people in this land by not telling us we're still here. So this mound sits on the corner of Shell Mound Street and Ohlone Way. And every year, for 20 years, we have been showing up on the day after Thanksgiving, the biggest shopping day of the year, to educate the public about why this should not happen ever again, to remind people that this is still a sacred site, that there's still hundreds of ancestors that are there beneath the ground, and that it's still a place that we consider sacred and a place where we pray. So for years, we have had allies and accomplices show up and join us in prayer and handing out information and talking to people that are going there to shop and asking people to shop elsewhere and to remember our responsibility to these ancestors that have been there for thousands of years. So we get people from all walks of life that come and show up and join us for this time. And we ask people that are in the Bay Area to join us too. We were not able to join last year together because of COVID. And we're hoping that we'll be safe to do it again this year. That's the first year in over 20 years that we haven't been able to join there. In 2011, we took over a site in Vallejo, California. This site had 2 shell mounds on it. It was the last open space on the Carquinez Strait, a place where my ancestors lived, the Carquin people. This place was called Sogorea Té. Today it's called Glen Cove. For 12 years, Wounded Knee Dale Campo, who was a Miwok man, he lived in Vallejo, grew up there, knew about these mounds and was trying to stop the city and the park district from destroying this site. They wanted to put in all kinds of plans, and we had gone to many meetings and had people from all over the world writing letters not to destroy this site. But in 2011, the city of Vallejo filed bankruptcy. And when they filed bankruptcy, they gave the park district $30,000 worth of permits for free in order to destroy this site. It left us no other choice but to take over this site in a prayerful manner. We lit a sacred fire that stayed lit for 109 days. There were 4 other fires around the world that stayed lit just as long. People from all over the world and all backgrounds came and supported us through prayer and food and supplies while we stayed there and protected this site from being destroyed. We stood up for 109 days together, and we thought that we had saved it, because what had happened at the end of this, 2 federally recognized tribes, the city and the park district, created the first cultural easement in the country so that the tribes had the same rights to this land as the city and the park district. So not one entity could ever change this land without the other two's permission. And so we left thinking that we had won. But what we realized was that the tribes that had signed the agreement agreed that there would never be more than 10 Indians at that site again. And they agreed that there would be no big drums there. And we were angry about this agreement that they signed, but realized that we were not the ones that signed it. So every year in the summer, we have hundreds of people that come out there, and we have ceremony for the salmon that come up our Carquinez Strait. In 2015, we stood against the canonization of Junipero Serra. We had people from all backgrounds come together to begin to talk about the doctrine of discovery. How did we get to where we're at? How did we get to this place where this person who started these 21 missions in California, that started the cultural genocide of our people, become a saint? I grew up a Catholic, so I know that when you have a saint, you ask the saints to intervene on your behalf to have a miracle happen. How could we as California natives pray to a saint who we liken to Hitler, someone who created a genocide on our people? We implored the Pope not to create this canonization of this man who did so much harm to us. And we lost by the Catholic Church. They still made him a saint. But what we did do was opened up this way for us to have conversations today with the general public about the doctrine of discovery. And that doctrine, that papal bull that was created, allowed Christianity to go into countries with people of darker skin, saying that they were only half souls, so that they could take their land by the sword or by the cross. It allowed for colonization to happen all over the world because of this law that was created, saying that Native people all over the world that were darker skinned were basically only half human. That's what started this entire process across the globe. There's a landscape in Berkeley. I talk about the landscapes because we started off talking about the cartography. There's a landscape in Berkeley. Here's the West Berkeley Shell Mound, which I've been fighting to protect for 5 years. Up here is Indian Rock and Mortar Rock, which is a ceremonial place for our people, surrounded by a community of people that are well off. People come up there and climb that rock. They do practice climbs on that rock. But really, we as Indigenous people, as Lishan people, have no access to that area. If you triangulate it and you come over here to UC Berkeley, under the stadium and under Faculty Glade and the Faculty Clubhouse is a shell mound and a village site. And you follow it right down Strawberry Creek and it'll take you back down to the West Berkeley Shell Mound. Because we have built so much, we cannot see that landscape, that sacred landscape that my ancestors had used for millennia. The West Berkeley Shell Mound is the oldest of all shell mounds in the Bay Area. It was the very first place that my people lived along the bay. We lived in other places up in the hills and stuff, but this was the very first village site that was created, the very first shell mound that was created. It's a part of our cosmology stories. It tells us when we lay our ancestors to rest here at the shell mound, it's directly aligned with our island, which you now call Alcatraz. And on Alcatraz Island, our people never went there. That was a resting place for our ancestor spirits for 4 days while we had ceremony here on the land. And on the evening of the 4th day, as the sun was setting, their spirits would go through what we call the Western Gate. That's where the Golden Gate Bridge is today. So this is a part of our history, a part of who we are supposed to be. Our spirituality is land-based. We cannot move our spiritual places from the West Berkeley Shell Mound 3 blocks over because that's not where our stories are from. This is a particular place where we have to have ceremony there. 5 years ago, a developer wanted to create condominiums and big box shopping on this lot, 1900 4th Street. If you can imagine, in all these years, nothing has been built on that land. It's a flat parking lot right now. There's basically been no building over these hundreds of years. It was a place where folks put their boats up on. It was a place where people park on now, but it really hadn't been built upon like all of the other places in Berkeley. We had fought this for at the beginning, went to zoning board meetings, kept them up till 2 o'clock in the morning, sent in letters. Over 1,000 letters came in from people on our side. Their side had 5 letters on their behalf. And we came up with this alternative plan. What if we didn't have shopping there? What if we didn't have these high-rise condos there? What if we opened up the space? This place could be a place where 4th graders from all over the Bay Area could go and learn not only about the past, but the resiliency of the Lishan people. If we could open up Strawberry Creek where it had originally meandered through there. If you know where the railroad tracks are right behind there, that's actually where the bay used to come up to. And so everything on that side is all fill. If we could build up the land so that we can grow oak trees again, and we could place this object in the center. It's a hollow building that they use in architecture all over the world. And you put that there, and you could create this walkway up to the top where people could view what my ancestors had saw 200 years ago. And we could cover it in poppies, and 4 months out of the year, it would be bright orange. And if you go into it, we could create a cultural center. And in the center could be a theater that's 360 degrees around. And you could see, hear, smell, and feel what it was like to be at a shell mound 200 years ago. There is no one place in all of the Bay Area that talks about the history of Ohlone people, that this would be a place that we could do that if we work together. This last year, the West Berkeley Shell Mound was named one of the 11 most endangered historic places in the nation. One of the that we had gone into court against this development, and we won the first court case. And they appealed it. And while that appeal was happening, it was named one of the 11 most endangered historic places in the nation. 95% of these places that are named like this are saved. We were in appeals court, and about a week ago or so, we got the court ruling that we had lost, that they sided back with the developer. We are planning on going forward to the California Supreme Court. We figure we won one, they won one, now we need a tiebreaker, right? So we're not giving up. This place has to be here for the future generations of not just my people, but all people that live in the Bay Area now. We started the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust in about 2016. Myself and Janella LaRose, who had been working with me on the Shell Mound work for so long, we created a urban Indigenous women land trust because looking back at the fight for Sogorea Te, we realized that we could have possibly created that cultural easement with the city and park district if we had this as a tool. And we started this not knowing what a land trust was. My friend, who's a professor at UC Davis, Professor Beth Rose Middleton, wrote a book called Trust in the Land. It's about native land trusts. And there are only a few in the country. And they're growing right now. But at the time, she invited me to a meeting in Southern California with native land trusts. And these native land trusts, I found out, were buying back their own homelands, their own sacred sites, so that they could have access to them, their own places so that they could preserve and protect them, and they could revitalize the culture that had been taken away through colonization. And I came back with this idea with Janella. But first there was a story. I met this man named Dune Lankard, who is an Alaskan native who saved 140,000 acres of his territory after the Exxon Valdez spill. And while I was having lunch with my newfound friend, I asked him, I said, Dune, I said, I'm sitting in these meetings and they're all men. And I said, is it a boys club? And Dune laughed and he said, yeah, pretty much. Not just native land trusts, but all land trusts are mostly run by men. And I was like, and I brought that information back to Janella and I. And Janella and I talked about it, and we said there's a time right now that we need to really examine why it is and what has happened to land since men have been in charge of it. And when you look at what has happened across the world with men in charge of land, you correlate it to what has happened with women and our bodies, the sacredness being taken away, the rape of the land, the rape of women, the desecration of things. And so we needed to figure out, how do we bring that back into balance? And the Sogorea Te Land Trust is really about trying to create that, trying to create the balance of what had been and what could be. And it doesn't mean that we, I have my son and my grandsons, and she has too, and doesn't mean we leave them on the side. It means we bring them in to remember what our traditional teachings tell us about how we are supposed to live in reciprocity with the land again. And so this Indigenous Women-Led Land Trust is on my territorial land, but it's an Indigenous Women-Led Land Trust. So we have Indigenous women from many different tribes that are a part of this. You see, back in the 1950s and 60s, there was a forced relocation program by the US government to move Native people off of reservations and into the cities with the hopes that they would assimilate so much that they would disappear. Again, that practice failed. But what does rematriation mean? Stephen Newcomb, who's Shawnee and Lenape and the executive director of the Indigenous Law Institute, writes, I mean to restore a living culture to its rightful place on Mother Earth, or to restore a people to a spiritual way of life in sacred relationship with their ancestral lands without interference. As a concept, rematriation acknowledges that our ancestors lived in spiritual relationships with our lands for thousands of years, and that we have a sacred duty to maintain that relationship for the benefit of our future generations. And we believe that this can happen with Indigenous women-led leadership, because women have a different way of taking care of each other. They take care of the world, taking care of people. We look at today what has happened when we were going through COVID crisis, and women that were in leadership, how well their countries did and how well they provided for them to make sure that their communities had enough money to live off of, and that they didn't have to worry about being without jobs or being without housing, that they figured out different ways of taking care of people, unlike our country and many other countries around the world. This was the first piece of land that was returned to us in 250 years, where you see that circle of people. There's a group called Planting Justice in Oakland. It is an organic nursery that they hire formerly incarcerated men and women to work on these in this nursery. And when Standing Rock happened, they went and they were moved by what had happened there. And they asked the elders there what they should do. And the elders said, you should work with the First Nation people on whose land you're on. And they took that to heart. When they came back to Oakland, they had an elder, Athabascan elder, working for them. And they told her the story. And she said, you need to talk to Janella and Corrina. Well, we had never met Gavin and Hale, but we went and talked to them under this California walnut tree one day. They told us that story and said, we would like to gift you back this 1/4 acre of land that we are no longer using. And Janelle and I couldn't believe that someone was going to give us back land. And we agreed to take the land on a condition. You see, we didn't have any relationship with these folks. And we said, we will take the land if you accept that Janella will be here full time and that she will create relationships with people that work here. Because how weird would that be for us to walk through that gate on the street and come through this land that people are working on and have no relationship with them? And so the relationship was built with people that were working there, began to clean up this place that had transmissions and garbage on it, and build up medicinal plants. I believe my ancestors have a funny sense of humor. You see, this waterway here is called LaShawn. That's our waterway, who we're named after. If you look in the background, you'll see the freeway there. And that's where the bay used to come up to. So this is quite possibly near or on a village site that my ancestors had for thousands of years. But that's not the only thing. This place is a 1/2 mile walk from my own home. And so my ancestors have been taking care of me in this kind of way, creating miracles along the way while we've been doing this work. Since that time, Hametka was created on that land. And Hametka in our language means a place where we all gather. It's a place we believe to take care of people when things are rough. When we know that this place is in a very depressed part of Oakland. It's in Sabrani Park. It's in a dead end. It's a place that's poor and forgotten. And we know that those kind of places are forgotten when there's man-made and human-made disasters, and that nobody's coming to save that neighborhood. But it is our responsibility as Indigenous people of this land to take care of our guests here. And so we have created Hametka, which is a place that has 3,000 gallons of fresh water tanks, another 1,200 gallons of rainwater catchment. We have an outdoor kitchen that has been built out. We have medicinal plants that we're growing and making traditional medicines. We have first aid kits and food available, and we're hoping to put solar panels there as well. A touchstone in the neighborhoods where people can go to feel safe. It's a ceremonial place as well. We're bringing back our language and our cultural revitalization, sharing the names of our traditional plants that have always grown here on our lands, re-engaging our elders and our youth in working with the plants, and working the land with people from all walks of life. People, young people, old people, people of all different colors and traditions come and help to share working on the land, creating community again. Especially in urban areas, we find that it's difficult for people to engage in the land. And so these are opportunities for people to do that again. We know that, that when people engage in the land, their health is better, their hearts are better, their minds are better. And so the being in touch with the land in this kind of way actually helps us to heal. During COVID, we created a community food distribution because our elders and our people that were immunosuppressed and people with small children and working on the front lines did not have access to fresh food. And so we have a relationship with the Giltrack farm in Albany, where we take care of land there and grow food. And we began to harvest the food from there. And then when the restaurants closed down, there was excess food. And so we were giving out about 100 boxes of food a week to families and community members that were in need. We are still here. This is a small picture of the Confederated villages of LaShawn. This is my auntie that told me the story of going to live in San Leandro. And we have generations of people. So even though we have been invisibilized by history and by people not telling our story and white papering us out of history, we continue to be on our own lands. I do this work because my grandchildren are forcing me to do this work. I see them and I know that I cannot leave this place without giving them the space to not have to tell these horrific stories anymore. That we as community come together, as I tell these stories with you, that you spread these stories and we begin to teach and show a responsibility for one another again. Being a good guest on a lonely land, being a good guest so we could be good hosts. Little people know what it means to be a good guest. I ask little people what it means to go to your grandparents' house or your best friend's house. How do you behave yourself? And as adults, we teach them the right things. We teach them all the answers because they have them. They say you don't touch things that aren't yours. You don't break things. You say thank you and please, and you don't go in the refrigerator, right? We know how to be a good guest, but as adults, we forget we are also the guests in someone else's home. We want to be good hosts, but we need good guests. And we can't do this work without you. And so it's difficult sometimes. And so I listened to this quote from Linda Hogan's, walking, I'm listening to a deeper way. Suddenly all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. It holds us up to remember that our ancestors are there, to remember that we are the bridge between the past and the future. And I look forward to working with all of you to create a better future for those next generations to come.
Oh, wow. Let's take a big deep breath, siblings. You've been blessed with a full story that we're not often given tonight, and your heart might be as full as mine. So why don't we just share some words of appreciation first? I see some in the chat room. This is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your time tonight and all that you do. Perhaps I4C can support the effort she is describing. Yes, we can do that too. Our first effort is to get to know these stories. Would anyone like to verbalize a word of gratitude for Corrina before we move into questions and answers? Just unmute yourself. I see Jale's hand. And Peter Nelson.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Jale, and then Peter.
Right. Yes, I'm just so amazed that you seem to have memorized all that incredible history of yours and the tribes in this country. Um, I participate in a race unity Zoom meeting, and I heard on that one of the sessions that the Pope actually uh, told the Christians missionaries who were coming to this country that any land that is not owned by Christians, you can take over. And that is exactly what happened. And without regards to the true owners of the land. So they took everything that they could find. That of course they were all inhabited by the natives, and you know, they said Christopher Columbus discovered America, but this America was already inhabited by a lot of people, all, you know, indigenous people. So it's really a hoax in that. But I want to thank you myself very much for this incredible story and sad story you told us. And, you know, we will work together, hopefully, to make a difference in the future. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Corrina.
Jale. And that policy, it was called the Doctrine of Discovery. You can look it up. And we are going to be doing some more programming on that. Father Tom and I actually talked about that today, that we're going to do some programs on the beginning of the history of colonialism, especially because it contributes to white nationalism and Christian nationalism. So we're trying to pull on the threads that help us understand all of these different intersectionalities. Peter's going to go, and then Jacqueline.
Thank you, Corrina, for educating us. I knew some things of what happened to Native population here before and after the missions, but I did not know about the things that I've driven by, you know, Shell Mound and so forth. So very appreciative of this. I was going to post, maybe we can find some support through ICCC for you. It's hard to speak for all the communities, but one thing that occurred to me to help win the next legal case that you have is to gain more public support or more education. Have you, I see that perhaps an opportunity maybe for a public relations type campaign. Have you considered this at all, and making some effort to, I would think, you know, other interfaith groups and KQED and other ways to get the information out. I also have a link, Will, for Mark Charles, who's Navajo, describing the doctrine of discovery and how it influences all the way to Supreme Court decisions. I'll post that here. But thank you so much.
We're going to let Jacqueline ask her question, and then Corrina will answer those three responses. And there's some other thank yous in the chat room that we'll read in just a moment. Jacqueline?
I just want to express my appreciation for your courage. You know, I'm just in awe. I'm in awe of you, of your willingness to stay associated, to not disassociate from the truth, and to share it with such dignity so that I could hear. I mean, it's really quite something. So just, I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for listening. I know sometimes it's difficult to hear for folks for the first time, maybe also. So it's a lot to hear. And thank you, Peter. Yes, we had just heard about the court case. And so, yes, we are thinking about doing a different kind of a PR campaign. We had hundreds of people out on the site that created a beautiful mural. If you go to shellmound.org, you can find all kinds of beautiful documentaries, clips. There's a beautiful animation that was created that tells the history and what we hope to do on that land. And we're hoping that we will get public input. We are hoping that maybe we can do something over Memorial Day weekend when we can gather people. We have had many interfaith prayers at the site. And so we have had Christians and Muslims and Jewish people, Tibetan and Korean drummers and Aztec dancers and Native people and Hawaiian chanters. And so people really from all walks of life have been welcome to come on that land and to pray with us to protect that sacred site. And so you all are welcome. At the time of the appeal court case, they put up a 6-foot fence with barbed wire around the entire site while the court case was happening. We've invited people to come out and to put ribbons on the fence and signs of appreciation, and to put pictures on the West Berkeley Shell Mound or Save West Berkeley Shell Mound. There's 2 different Facebook places. Put pictures up to show your support. And that's something that you could ask your congregations to do. And they could do it at a safe way, because they don't have to gather if the people are not wanting to gather, to go out and put ribbons up, and not to feel discouraged because they've actually paid somebody to come out and take them down every day. If they go out on a Friday evening, though, they'll stay up all weekend. So it's just a way for us to continue to show the support and the love for the space and place that's there. Yes, I'd love for folks to do that. And I will definitely let Will know if we're going to do something on Memorial Day, and he can send that out to all of you to come out and participate.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I'm reading some of the responses from Greg. Although I knew some of this story, but to hear it in such depth is both depressing and enlightening. Thank you. Reverend Channing Miller, thanks so much. I first met Corrina at the Chaplaincy Institute in Berkeley. I'm so happy to hear you again with so much more information. We visited the Berkeley Shell Mound together. Nancy Thursby from Orinda Community Church. I'm on the Mercy and Justice Committee of my church, Orinda Community Church. We're a congregation of the UCC, United Church of Christ. We've been called to learn and help you. I will be bringing the recording of this committee, and we will be following up with your organization. Peter Nelson shared the video, We the People, the 3 most misunderstood words, a TED Talk on presentation on the Doctrine of Discovery. Nancy shared, this is very humbling. Thank you for sharing with us. Linda D., this is such a reawakening for all of us, and to hear about how these lands have not been saved. The Shell Mound link is there, shellmound.org, and Reverend Sharon shared, Corrina, thank you for educating us on things we never learned it in our formal education. There is a book by Benjamin Madley on the California Indigenous Genocide that's among the most hard to read. And I suggest it, but be ready for the atrocities that our people committed here. Corrina, can you say a little bit more about how California's Indian genocide was different than in other places of the country, but still based on many of the same ideological and cosmological worldviews?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about, if you just think back 1776, when folks on the East Coast were signing the Declaration of Independence, the colonization of California was just beginning with the mission period. So it's very different the way that America ended up here, and the way that those stories are told. And we think in our mind, because it's kind of muddled education that we get, that it was the entire state. I mean, all of the states were all together at one time. I mean, at that time, but that wasn't true. And so, during that time, it wasn't until 1880, 1850 that, California became a state that was included in the United States. And so that's how it was, it was really different. It's 200 years ago. So that's not that long ago. I think my auntie's like 86, 87 years old, or, and so maybe about 2 of her lifetimes that happened. And so that's not that long ago when we look at it in that kind of a way that this happened. So everything that you see built in California is only about 200 years old. It's a very young state. The other thing is that this governor that we have right now has made an apology and is created this thing, a truth truth and healing. It's not a truth and reconciliation. It's about hearing the stories of what happened to California Native people. Because of the missions, also, we have to realize that all of the mission Indians along the coast of California are not federally recognized by the government. And so, why do you think that that's possible? You know, the coastline is, of course, the richest part of California, and to have California natives not to be recognized by the federal government really erases us from not only history but the ability to speak about offshore drilling, about what happens in our oceans and our bays. It gives us not the ability to do those things. The only thing that we can do as California Native people legally is to talk about our ancestral sites being disturbed. And really, it's not that great of a deal. So it really takes people like all of us coming together to really put pressure on people. Now, I will say the city of Berkeley, and just to be, and I know this wasn't that part of your question, Will, but I just want to let you know the city of Berkeley is on our side, the tribe side. We were in this lawsuit together. They were sued by the developers, and we intervened on that suit on the side of the city of Berkeley. And the city of Berkeley has been on our side and have done amazing things since the creation of our relationship. They changed their signage coming into Berkeley on all points of coming into Berkeley. Their signage says, "Welcome to Berkeley, Ohlone territory." Last year during the George Floyd uprising, when people from across the country were putting Black Lives Matters on their streets as a mural, the two African-American council members also said yes, and we want one that says Ohlone territory as well, to remind us that we are always on this land that has been stolen. And so really beginning to work with cities, city council people. We're beginning to work with city council people in San Leandro and Alameda, in Albany, El Cerrito, all of these places that have been part of. And we're beginning to do work with folks that like Save Mount Diablo, which is not the park district itself, but another entity, and trying to have access to traditional places of our land. So there's different ways that we can be involved in the territories that you guys are all on.
And so it seems as though the Mount was the special place for the medicine men. The shell mounds were, they're like our cemeteries, but also your town hall. Also, your like most magnificent place where you would do multiple celebrations, your town hall, your town center. And so maybe the way for white Americans to understand this is, how would you feel if your parents or your grandparents or great-grandparents or great-grandparents' cemeteries were defiled? What would you do? How can we stand with Ohlone and Bay Miwok and Karkeen and others to help resacralize their cemeteries and town halls and the special places for them? And how do we preserve those places where you didn't go, but your medicine men did, and they were sacred places for them, like Tayushtak, the highest point in Contra Costa County. How can we? What would you like us, if we were to be allies? What kind of actions would you desire of us?
Well, thank you for that question. Definitely we'll be making a call out to folks for the West Berkeley Shell Mound and what we can do to support that. We're in the middle of creating a new strategy for that. We're hoping to create door knockers or people to go out and to share the information with people, having bullet points. And so those are some things that are coming up with the West Berkeley Shell Mound for sure. You know, when you talk about Tayushtak, or Sacred Mountain, I always ask people not to go to the top. I know that people think that they have the inherent right to go anywhere they want to, right? And I always say, especially folks that are Christian, that are your belief systems, right? Your cosmologies, your stories, your creation stories, talk about the Garden of Eden, where the world was created. Well, for us, Tayushtak is that. It's where our world was created. It's our Garden of Eden. Now, we wouldn't just allow anybody to go tramping through the Garden of Eden, right? And so we shouldn't allow people to go up to our very top of our mountain either. And so we asked people not to do that. When I talk to fourth graders about it, I say, look, I know that sometimes you'll end up there. Maybe your parents will take you up there, or you might end up there later on in life and forget that I've asked you not to. But if you do remember, when you go to that most sacred place and you find trash laying around, you wouldn't want trash laying around your most sacred place, that you carry that trash out with you, to remember that there were people there that started there. Our belief system is that we started there, that all Ohlone people and Bay Miwok people, that was our start with our flood story. We all have a flood story, and that was ours. And at the tip of that mountain, that was the only thing that was left up there. And as the flood started to go away, that the human beings were sent out in 4 directions to create the villages that we come from. And so, so that's why, it's very simple. If we just put together our belief systems, we wouldn't allow people just to go tramping along our Garden of Eden. And then we shouldn't trample along our Tayushtak,
Or your Holy of Holies.
our Holy of Holies. Yeah. I think Linda
So
has
the-
her hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to just mention this book, An American Genocide, The American States and the California Indian Catastrophe by Benjamin Madley. Linda's next, and then I think Channing might have a question for us. Please unmute, Linda.
My question is directly going back a few sentences that you stated, Corrina, that the tribes along California's coastal areas are not recognized by the federal government. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And why are we not pressing that to also stand up? Because at the time I remember, well, I'll leave it at that.
So federal recognition is a racist process set up by the federal government, not by us. We are the only people in the country that have to prove who we say we are. If you say you're Irish, you're Irish. If you're Italian, you're Italian. You're Filipino, you're Filipino. But American Indians are the only ones that have to prove who they say that they are to the federal government, because the federal government has responsibilities to American Indian people. And so it's difficult because they want us to prove that we have our culture intact. There are 7 different criteria. You have to prove that you had minutes to a meetings that you had for a city government like government, right? And people that were running from genocide at the time in California, which was much different than the East Coast, do not have those documents to prove. It's impossible to prove that because we were running and hiding from multiple genocides, one after consecutively. And so you can get on the list to try to prove that fact. The US government, there's 178 different tribes from across the country that are still trying to prove that they are who they say they are. They are approving 1.5 per year. So if you were at the end of the line, I don't have time in my lifetime to stand in line. And so my job right now is to do the work of returning land, returning our language, returning our ceremonial places, re-engaging people that now live in our territory to create relationships. That's my job in this lifetime. Now, I hope that this bridge that I create with my back will help other people to do that other work if that's what they want to do along the line. If my grandchildren want to do that, that's up to them. But at least they'll have a solid standing by the time that comes, by the work that we're doing right now together. Federal recognition is a difficult process, and it's not one that I hope to have to deal with. There are tribes that have been denied in the Bay Area multiple times, and it will take an act of Congress. And perhaps now is the time. Maybe now is the time that we have Deb Haaland in the Department of Interior to change those racist policies. Maybe now is the time for her to re-examine whether coastal California natives should be recognized by the federal government. But I have my hands full right now, but maybe in a year or so I could look that up.
Thank you for the response to that. I have tried to keep ahead of some things that have been stated on the Indian Bureau of Affairs that, you know, you get behind on not knowing, because at the time the tribes needed to register. That was going on, what, 15, 20 years ago, that they were coming together, you had to register, and I did not know. So about 240 Native Americans that we know throughout the United States, you're telling me still 178 of those that have band together are still not recognized. There's a lot of work ahead. Thank you.
On the most expensive land now, because the settlers took it for themselves. And Peter shared last year the Supreme Court ruled about half of Oklahoma is Native American land. There's a link in the thing there from KQED. Supreme Court rules that about half of Oklahoma is Native American land. But we've broken every single treaty we had with those that were recognized too. Over 750 treaties broken. And yet it was our white culture that calls them Indian givers. Such projection. Channing's going to go, and then Greg.
Corrina, it was good to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say you've just spoken about how timely this period is. We heard from you that Gavin Newsom has issued an apology and wants to create a forum for telling stories. I guess my question is, not only is this the best time, but what can we do to change our education system so that, as most people said, thank you so much for telling us things that we did not know. Thank you so much. And that is so true of the history of slavery. People don't know what really happened because our educational system has blanked that out. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I would really like to see a movement in this country towards recognizing Native peoples, African-American peoples, you know, all the treatment of those who are not white in our history. I would like to see that run through so that it's not just a 4th grade curriculum for California, but a part of the national study that kids have to take, you know, in their history. So I would really I'd like to be involved in that. I don't know what you think about that, but I'd like to see that the only change, or one of the biggest changes that can happen, is if we can re-educate our young people into the truth of the country, of our history.
Thank you so much for that. I totally agree with you. You know, the state of California was supposed to pass an ethnic studies curriculum that was supposed to be taught in high schools. They've washed it down. It's so much that it's not, you know, that's the problem, is that it gets to the higher ups. They've got all of these people and educators and professors that are working vigorously to put together curriculum that is relevant. And then it gets up to the top and it gets washed down again. That's a problem. I think we need to get to the state education department. Also need to ask that our local school districts do not adopt history books that were created on the East Coast to be taught on the West Coast, because the history is not as relevant as it is on the East Coast. And they don't know anything about the West Coast, and so they don't write about it. I'm also working with the city of Alameda. One of the council members there is also on a curriculum development project with the city's school district, and is going to push to implement education about the tribes from this area, both in elementary, middle school, and high school, and so can build on the curriculum over years so that people can continue to do that. We're hoping to also create a space in Alameda where students could come and help with gardening and learn about not us in the past, but actually do work with our community in the present so that they have that opportunity to do that. And so I think that we have to start at the very local level, because it looks like when we push it up to the state, they continue to wash down. So it looks like we have to kind of bring it in both ways. Start at the very local level with the school districts that you work with, and try to get the curriculum in. There's a lot of teachers that are working on creating their own curriculum around fourth grade history when they know the true history. We also have a lot of people that are out of staters that don't know the history of California that are teaching it. And so they only have the books, and sometimes they don't have the resources. And so it really takes involved parents and community members to really give these resources to teachers so that they could teach our students the right way.
I just want to say, I was a teacher in the beginning of my career, and I taught primary education in Palo Alto. And I was on the social studies committee for the district. And it was my intention to help create a social studies curriculum for primary age children, to really help them to understand from the very beginning, what the situation was, to help them to have cultural competency, to help them to understand the history of the United States, and not just from a white perspective. So unfortunately, my life changed and I had to, change careers, but I still believe in that. I think that we need to, create a curriculum that starts very young in the schools and goes all the way through.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
agree
Chairman.
with you. Thank you so much. I think that as adults, we're afraid for kids to hear these things that we're afraid to hear. But kids are really, really resilient. And really just say, is slavery a good thing? And kids will say no, because at that age, they're really about justice. They know what's right and wrong. And they can really tell those, and they can really engage in conversations really good, as long as we present it as facts and they understand that, what it feels like to have been wronged.
Right. And I think for white populations in the educational system, the fear is not what a young child would have about learning our history. Their fear is what they've learned about the differences between white society and non-white society. And so I think they're afraid that people don't want our young people to become, really aware of what's happened.
And there are powerful forces out there that are working to keep those textbooks limited, right? Even on the conversation around slavery, just this week there was someone saying that it needed to show the good, the bad, and the ugly, as if there was a good side to slavery. And that's why I think Benjamin Madley's book is so powerful, is because he doesn't pull punches, and he names the names that we have named towns like Fremont after, who were colonizers and abusers and rapists, and we shouldn't be celebrating them here in California. Greg is going to ask a question, and then Zula has a question, and we're almost done with our time, so we're going to let those be our last two questions. Thank you. And then Corrina is going to have the last word. Greg?
Okay, thank you very much, Corrina. This has been extremely impactful. I have a question for you as a person who thinks I own some land that, of course, was expropriated from your people. Are there any programs, and I know you have a sort of a land rental program, but are there any programs available for kind of transferring land back to where it came from?
Yeah, that's exactly what the land trust is. The Sogorea Te Land Trust accepts donations of land to rematriate the land, to give it back so that Indigenous people can practice culture and cultural revitalization there. And so, yes, if you are interested, please get a hold of us at SogoreaTeLandTrust.org is the website. And I'll put it in the chat.
It's in the chat a couple times already, but I'll make a slide for the closing so that those that are online and watching now will be able to see it there.
Okay, great.
And the other rematriation that is happening among some faith communities is we're learning that some Protestant I don't know about Catholic, but I've heard of some Protestant congregations that are rematriating their land to the original First Nations where they live all over the country. And especially as smaller congregations are closing, we expect up to about 20% of congregations may close by the end of COVID, that we may see more of that, and building the relationships with folks is the big important thing there. Zula, and then we'll hear a last word from Corrina.
Okay, hi, and thank you so much. I know how difficult it is to share these things, and I have a specific question about, you've mentioned a few times about the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast. So is that strictly for the differences between the native people, the indigenous peoples? And just my own little comment, I think, and forgive me, I'm not for burning books, but I think we need to burn all of our history books because they are all full of lies, not just here, everywhere. So yeah, my question about the East and the West.
Yeah, so the East Coast, what I'm talking about is how, we hear the story about the Mayflower and the 13 colonies that happened over there. And so that happened quite a few years before what happened here in California. That's when I talk about the East Coast. So all of that was happening over there on the East Coast, and people were fighting the American Revolution and and signing the Declaration of Independence when that was done so that they could have their independence from Britain, right? All of that was happening on the East Coast, had no impact really on what was happening in California. And I center in California because that's where we're at and that's where I'm from. At the time of our colonization, it started with the Spanish missions coming up California at about the same time. All of that was going on the East Coast. They weren't even thinking about California.
Right,
And
right.
California was happening here with the Spanish missions and going through our own different processes here. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. I
Okay.
just wanted to be clear in my own mind. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Zula. Well, I just want to say thank you all for participating and opening your hearts and your minds to listening to sometimes difficult information, and to also being willing to sit with me to create dreams. And I think that that's what we need to do. We're at a time in our history of life and the world where we need to have hope and dreams. And I think that this is what it allows us to do. It doesn't allow us, don't get stuck in the horrific history, but know that it happened. Today, what we can do is try to heal some of those wounds. And healing some of those wounds may be coming together to create beautiful new ways forward, ways of working with the land together, ways of communicating with one another, standing up with each other against injustices, and doing all of that kind of work. And so I hope that today is a way for us to begin to bridge those relationships, to create relationships where we go forward and work together as we're all on this land, and we're not going anywhere else. So we need to learn to live as good guests and good hosts together. But thank you so much, Will, for inviting me again.
Thank you. We're to our time tonight, and so we thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry if there were others that weren't able to ask a question or share a thought, but we want to be able to share this this link on the Sogorea Té Land Trust. I've given there personally, and encourage you to think about what you might want to give to that on an annual basis. And we encourage you to be a part of making yourself into an ally. And this is the important work that we have to do, folks. And it's interconnected with all the other work that we're doing with Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Black people, our friends suffering from the climate breakdown in Central America and joining caravans to come here to try to survive. All of our justice issues are interconnected. So as we come together and we learn about one part of the human family and the freedom that they need, we learn about the freedom that so many others do as well. So thank you so much for being a part of this tonight. Thank you to Corrina Gould for your presentation and just every time I hear you make one of these presentations, there's new information, and you just take us to that deep place that we need to be in order to be fully human. So thank you so much. Blessed be.
Thank you. Be well.